Blood and Salt, written by Hubert L. Mullins, narrated by Kendra McMahon. All this time, there was no apprehension of any danger in the minds of passengers, and no one was in any condition of panic or hysteria. After all, it would have been strange if they had been, without any definite evidence of danger. Lawrence Beasley, second-class passenger. Part 1. Doomed from Design. Southampton, England, April 10th, 1912. 9:30 a.m. "Too early to be sleeping, William," said Dr. Simpson as he reached across Benjamin and nudged the old man in the ribs. "Just studying the backs of me eyelids," said Dr. O'Loughlin, Titanic's chief surgeon. He became fully alert and turned on the honest Irish charm so many aboard had come to know and love. "When you reach my age, you'll be looking for these first moments of rest. I'm the oldest crewman on the ship, you know." "I thought Captain Smith was the oldest," said Ben. "He told us at muster he's 62. Dr. O'Loughlin grinned, his grizzled face turned in jubilation. "And he is. And so am I. But I'm 3 months older." He winked at Ben and grabbed his knee in affection before standing up and smoothing his uniform. The rest of them joined him, all wearing their finest full-dress regalia for the swarm of passengers about to embark. Today was a big day, and Ben felt out of sorts. Of the medical staff, aside from Matron Wallace, he was probably the least experienced. They were good people to let him come along, even if he didn't plan on making the return trip. The gangway door yawned open, bleeding in crystal air and golden sun. A breeze carried in something a little more sinister, the rot and ruin of 100 unwashed Irish, Swedes, and Gypsies. They sparkled all the way down the ramp, but it wasn't like those in first class. These sparkles weren't born of excess. These sparkles were of new beginnings. The crowd of mostly women and children was difficult to read, for half seemed content to stay in the old world, while the others were nearly pushing the staff aside so they could board. They carried with them their entire lives, reduced to a few burlap sacks and frayed steamer trunks. Better get on with it then," said O'Loughlin. "Smith says we got almost 1,000 of 'em, mostly families." Benjamin York suspected as much. He stepped up to the gangway door and put one foot on the ramp and looked out. To his left, the ship extended for as far as he could see, a solid wall of black steel and rivets. The smell of fresh paint still lingered in the air, mixed with the sour water of the quay. He counted at least 3 more gangways, these filled with first- and second-class passengers, who were segregated now and would remain so for the next 7 days. Those ladies looked impressive in their dresses and wide hats and decadent ermine and seal coats. He'd turned to the right, to the open harbor and Titanic's forward. Today was a special day for many reasons, among them his second sighting ever of an automobile. It was being lowered down to deck through the ship's hatch, its white wheels gleaming in the morning sun. Someone would partially deconstruct it for the journey across the Atlantic. Ben must have been staring for too long, because Dr. O'Loughlin jabbed him in the ribs with something sharp. He said, "Get your mind back here this instant. We've work to do." And then he placed a button hook on his palm. Both Ben and the good doctor lined the door and checked each passenger's eyes before coming aboard. Trachoma was a nasty disease that was easily transmissible, especially in close quarters. And since Ben regularly saw as many as 10 tickets for the same cabin, he knew he couldn't let a single red or pus-filled eyelid come aboard. Using the button hook, he flipped eyelids out checked them for redness or swelling, then let them proceed down E-deck. Most of them had lice, but if the crew started turning away passengers over that, there'd be no steerage class at all. Ben was far more lenient than Dr. O'Loughlin and Dr. Simpson, and even Matron Wallace, who all broke up families when only one member was denied embarkment. Ben watched as the rejected turned and headed back down the gangway, dreams dashed. In the middle of the ramp, a boy no more than 8 was being escorted by his mother, a frizzy-haired girl with freckles and a nervous smile to the surrounding people. Ben's attention found them rather quickly because the boy was scraping something metal along the gangway railing. It was so obnoxious that he thought Dr. O'Loughlin was ready to part the potential passengers and address it himself. But the boy lost his hold on the shiny piece of metal, and it tumbled off the railing. It was too noisy to hear the splash, but nonetheless, it would forever live in berth 44, Southampton. The boy wailed, and the mother looked over the gangway, and Ben was certain he saw her tears chase the object into the water. And then she pulled the child into her chest and hugged him. Ben didn't understand the significance of what he'd dropped, but knew that with her crying, she was going to make her eyes red and puffy before seeing the medical staff. Ben turned to O'Loughlin and said, "I'll be right back."
"Where do you think you're going?"
"Just there, back in a jiff." He pushed through the third-class passengers until he reached the mother and boy. Most everyone parted around him, recognizing his white starline coat as something important. They also realized that this was one of the men who decided whether they sailed away. When he reached the crying duo, he knelt in front of the boy and appraised him with practiced, gentle eyes. Ben always had a knack for calming children. He'd been with many during the worst parts of their lives. His mother always said it was a gift, and that's why he should go into medicine, to calm people in the face of sickness. "What's wrong, lad?" He shook his head, as if saying the words were too awful. Ben searched the mother for an explanation. "Dropped his dad's cross right over. Metal crucifix. Reed's carried it all the way from Killarney." "Your Reed?" The boy nodded, his big blue eyes like dots of ocean water. He sniffed back tears, his nose dripping. "I had a cross like that when I was a boy. Belonged to my dad, too." Ben looked past the mother. A trio of kids and an elderly lady stood waiting patiently. "Is your dad here?" Families and single women were all to board via this gangway. The boy shook his head. "Come on, Reed. Let's not bother this man any longer. Do I give this to you?" She pushed the boarding pass into his hands. Their cabin was number 66, down on F-deck. "Let me see you first," he said, and without the button hook, did a quick inspection of their eyes and mouths. As he escorted them to the front of the line, he said, "I'll be seeing you again, Reed, and we'll see if we can't find a replacement crucifix. How's that? One that would make your da proud." At this, Reed's eyes lit up, and so did his mother's. He didn't know how he could fulfill that promise. Then again, there were bound to be holy men on the ship. Later, once they were all on their way to Cherbourg, he'd ask around. Ben was about to step back through the gangway door when he turned to the cranes, hoping to spy another car being lowered into the forward hatch. He'd heard there were at least 7 on the cargo manifest. But now, there were no cars at all, but a long, black wooden box that creaked and rocked back and forth on its davit. This box seemed to swallow all the light, for it was so dark and ominous that he expected it to call up a storm. The more he stared at it, the more unease he felt, and he quickly averted his eyes just before his stomach churned. He didn't understand this at all. It was only a box. Titanic was full of them. The next influx of passengers rushed forward. Families of Hungarians, Swedes, A couple of Italians, and a lot of English were among those ready to start their new lives. And the next time Ben looked back toward the crane, the box was gone, lowered onto the ship it would share with him for the next week. The king turned to face his coterie as they each took a knee. His mind had expanded, but only a little. The passengers paid little attention to the world they inhabited, so it was mostly useless information. The best survival knowledge came from the poorest of society. Matilda Olson knew more about the world than either of the second-class ladies, and most certainly Minnie Pembroke, the hotel heiress. Ernest Burr and Clarence Clark knew enough about the workings of the ship and what he had to do in order to assure a quiet passage to the new world. This America, or more precisely, New York, sounded large enough to slip away and set up a permanent hive. For now, that was good enough. "What do you wish of us now?" said his coterie. All four women spoke in unison, their sated lips cracking with each word.
"Feast, but only the bitter bloods on the lower decks. Too many sweet bloods may ruin our chance of prosperity."
"But the bitter bloods are so rank."
"You will dine only on bitter bloods,"
he said, his voice rising in their minds, for the humans wouldn't see them upon the deck because the king didn't want it. "We exalt you, Everduck," a name he'd not heard in a long time.
"I will keep our numbers low for the sake of the hunt,"
he said, and he swiped a fingernail across his broken teeth. They'd all grow back by tomorrow night.
"Feast, and be wary of the humans. Do not assume they are all stupid."
"But the ship isn't safe," said his coterie. "The humans are everywhere. They love the sun and their weapons." The king looked above their heads toward the forward end of the ship. He smiled, his upper teeth forming a semicircle of points.
"I will keep us safe," he said. "Now be gone."